Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't be that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 1 year of law enforcement analysis experience with 8 years of intelligence analyst with the military. He holds a Master's of Science in Political Science. He's here to talk about his transition from the military to the sheriff's office. Please welcome Andrew Huellemeier. Andrew, how we doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I am doing well. So special thanks to Akshata Kumavat, who I had on the show about a month ago. She named names and told me that, hey, I need to get Andrew on the show. So here you are.
Here I am.
So you, when we were just talking there before we hit record, you had mentioned that you're into genealogy and that name Huellemeier has 4 E's in it. It's quite longer than what it used to be. What have you found out about your last name?
So, I mean, we went, as far as the Huellemeier side of my family genealogy, it's kind of boring because we pretty much I get that side of the family back overseas, and then the applications I use for all that, they don't do very well once you get back over. So pretty much after my dad's dad, you hit back over, you don't get a lot further than the fact that they're all from Germany kind of thing. So for that part of the family, it's pretty boring. You hit the wall on about my great, but the rest of the family gets pretty interesting as far as that goes. For the longest time, I know I was looking at my mom's side of the family. Her maiden name's Glenn. For the longest time, I thought they were Irish, and then doing kind of the research there, actually found it out that they were German last name, and they changed it right around the time of the Second World War to sound more English, Irish.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's you can start pulling that thread and find a bunch of interesting stuff, it sounds like. All right, but I had to cut it off there because we'll get on a tangent right here. So how did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
So as far as the job I'm in now, I found out about LinkedIn when I was actually looking to get out of the military, but I knew about law enforcement analysis probably before then. My mom, who I brought up her family, but my mom is a Cincinnati police officer, and she's been worked in their intelligence unit in that area for close to 10 years. And so I remember at least about the time I was graduating high school and all that, when I kind of learned about intelligence in the law enforcement type career field and that. But from, what I always saw then was police officers and them doing the work. It wasn't a civilian type analyst doing the job. And then when I went off to college, I was in the ROTC program and ended up getting selected during ROTC to be an intelligence officer in the Air Force, all along those lines. And that kind of led me here. And then as I was to get out of active duty in the military, the job happened to appear, and I said that sounded interesting, so I kind of asked my mom a few more questions than I had ever asked her about it before, and now I'm here.
Yeah, she probably tried to tell you about it before, and you wouldn't listen, right?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
All right, so when you were in college and you're studying political science, what were some of the avenues that you were trying to go?
So while I was getting my degree, I actually managed to get an internship with the congressman for, where I was growing up. I grew up in Cincinnati, so I did an internship with Steve Shabbat one summer while I was in college. I always knew I was going into the military while I was there, so that was kind of my primary route, and, wherever that kind of led me was kind of my plan at the time. But I was interested in, when I was studying political science, and getting involved in something in government, whether it was, some point working for the State Department or something along at the local level type government.
Okay. And then, so did you go into the military thinking that you would go into intelligence right away, or was that a kind of a process?
No, actually, I wanted to, when I originally was looking at the military, I wanted to fly airplanes. I wanted to specifically fly A-10. But at that time, the military was the Air Force specifically was looking to scrap the A-10. And so I said, well, I don't want to be a pilot if the one plane I want to fly, the whole Air Force is going to be gone by the time I actually am able to fly. Mm-hmm. So I kind of washed that aside in college, and my now wife, and I remember I said, oh yeah, this is what I wanted to do, and I was joining the military, and I showed her pictures. And of course, the first picture of the plane, the engine had bullet holes in it and things like that. And she looked and said, you are absolutely not flying that. I said, yeah, I know, it's too late. I already got picked to be an intel. I'm not going to be flying airplanes.
So why the A-10?
It was an honestly, it was to me, it was like kind of the cool factor
Mm-hmm.
of flying low, you're flying slow, and are able to blow up tank, that type of stuff, providing ground support and that type of stuff. It seemed really cool to me, and I was younger than I am now, and looking back now, I was like, yeah, that doesn't interest me now as I'm a little bit older, but when I was young, and the type of warfare we were fighting, terrorist organizations, that was going to put you kind of on the front lines, helping out the fight. At the time, Al Qaeda, and then as time has moved on, ISIS and those types.
Yeah. And so when you get into the military and you get into intelligence, so what training do you go through? Was this part of something that it took you a while to pick up the whole intelligence gig?
So I get into the military. I commissioned in May of 2014, and pretty much within a month, I was, we were on me and two other guys that I graduated and commissioned with, and we all go off to our technical training school, which is out in San Angelo, Texas. I had a little base called Goodfellow Air Force, and we go down there. There's three of us. We end up spending about a month once we get down there, waiting to actually get into class, and it's the longest. Outside of pilot training, one of the longest technical courses that the military has, and it's about 6 months long of training. And I'll say that my political science degree did not prepare me for what the military expects of an intelligence officer. There's a lot of stuff that I never would have thought I had to learn in that regard. So I'm learning things about the electromagnetic spectrum, how different types of communication, these different waveforms, understanding how radars function, just things that in my mind I'm going like, to me an intelligence officer is looking at, what's this bad person on that side of the world trying to do, not, what's this radar do, and how does this radar going to detect an airplane, and how can we prevent that radar from detecting an airplane? So it was a very, at least initially, a very difficult time for me. I would say the first 4 or so blocks of the instruction were fairly easy, and then we got into that technical stuff, and I was like, I don't know if I picked the right career, at least from the military's perspective, but I got through it, and luckily somehow, I don't know how I did it, but I managed to not fail any of the tests. I was able to graduate after the grilling I got of my life. I remember, to graduate, there were 3 exercises we go through at the very end, and I was at that one exercise away from the final exercise, and I probably got grilled for about a good hour by the instructor in front of the whole class about everything under the sun that they could think of. I honestly, to this day, don't know how I passed that test, but it was pretty entertaining. But yeah, I can say that probably the second or third most challenging course I ever had to deal with, that initial class.
Okay. So in terms of that grilling, was that something that all the students had to go through, or did you say something that you shouldn't have, or were being corrected?
I don't know if it was the instructor was trying to make sure that I deserved to go on to the next, portion of the course.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it was, I know there were a few things, or do you remember there were a few things I said where, I probably shouldn't have said that, and he was digging for more details because I probably gave him more information should have, type thing. I gave more, military always jokes about, giving people the rope to hang you with, and I gave him the rope to hang me with as I kind of went along that way. So I think it was a little bit of, him trying to make sure that I deserved to move forward, as well as me kind of giving him the means to continue the grilling.
So a little bit of back and forth there. And then, so with the intelligence training, Mary, so I know in the military there's various forms of intelligence. There's the hot topic one probably nowadays is people hear open source, OSINT, open source intelligence, and then there's signal intelligence, and then there's probably a couple others in there that you were learning about.
Yeah, so we learned about open source, human intelligence, signals intelligence, which the military breaks up into communications intelligence, and then ELINT, which is electronics intelligence, and then there's MASINT, which is measurements intelligence. Honestly, the best I've ever heard anybody describe that as, it's kind of magic. How that functions. Unless you've worked it, nobody really knows how the best. Yeah, when usually people ask me, well, when I went back to the Texas Hot, students would ask me about it, and I'd be like, it's magic. I don't really know too much about that. You got to find somebody who's done it.
Boy. Once you get past training, then what types of tasks are you doing as an intel officer?
So my first assignment, once once I graduated and got through the grilling, I moved on to Whiteman Air Force Base, where I was proceeded to be grilled again by my supervisor. But a lot of it was supporting an airframe. We were supporting B-2 bombers. And so a lot of our work was looking at nation, so how Russia's military organizes, how, China, North Korea, Syria, all those different countries, and how they were operating. Obviously, Syria kind of changed over my time in the military and from what it was when I initially joined. But so we would look at, what weapon systems do they have, and then look at things along the line of we'd have our missions that our actual airframe were tasked out against. If, in the event of a war, here's kind of what your plane's going to do and how it's going to support the war effort. So while I was there, I moved around a lot and did a lot of things. I started out mainly giving briefings to commanders and leadership about here's what these various nation states are doing, here's the type of activity that's going on, here are new weapon systems that are being developed by those countries, and then I moved on after that for the bomb squadron. So in that case, I'm sitting over directly with the pilot, and I'm responsible for training them on the different threats that they might encounter when they actually go flying. And then while I'm there, a bomb squadron, we go out and we do. We're over there supporting their daily flying. So they have a sortie they're going to fly today, and my job is to make sure that when I give them a briefing, I'm briefing them something, the training mission that they're actually.
Okay. All right. And then you eventually get into teaching, though, right?
Correct. So while I'm at White Boy out Kuwait, and while I'm there, I focus more on force protection and that type of stuff, so looking at terrorist threats and those type of things. And then once I get back from Kuwait, about 6 months left at Whiteman, and I'm deciding on where I want to go for my next assignment. So I talk with my wife, and I'm kind of like, where do we want to go? What do we want to do, kind of thing. And ultimately, I decided to go back. The next time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to get out or if I stay in on active duty. And I said, well, if I decide to get out, let's go back and take all of the knowledge and experience I learned while I was at Whiteman, while I was deployed to Kuwait, and try to teach the next generation of analysts and kind of do my bit to make sure that the knowledge that I learned is lost. So I ended up going back to the tech school, and I started spending my first year and a half there as an instructor teaching the new office.
All right. Now you're doing the grilling now, though, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now I get to do the grilling. But it was one of those things where having those varieties, spending time at Whiteman, and learning all the different things I learned there, plus that deployment while I was there, I got to be exposed to a lot of different things in the intelligence community. So when I was at tech school, I was teaching, I would say I had enough experiences while between my assignment and deployment, teach about 75% of the course. And the only thing I really didn't have a ton of experience to teach was a lot of the signals collection platforms, which was fine with me because we had a bunch of people who had a ton of experience in those type of platforms. So it was, so I got to do a lot of the grilling, and I actually got to sit in that exercise where I got myself grilled as instructor now, sitting through that exercise. I would say, honestly, as the instructor, the most rewarding part was I had several students that, they struggled through kind of like I did, how I struggled through in the beginning, and learning things that I never thought I would ever have to learn. So I got to sit down and help. I would say my time there, I probably helped 5 or 6 that, had similar struggles to myself, actually get through the course and get through that material.
Yeah. So then, do you have any stories that you like to tell during this time when you're in the military, either as an analyst or as an instructor there, that just gives the audience a better idea of what you were going through?
Yeah, one of the stories when I was deployed is it's kind of one of those stories where you sit there and you kind of think about it and you're like, well, why'd we? It's in a way it would be one of those stories of something that an analyst should never do, and this is a story I tell my students on things not to do, and you have these lessons that you learn from time to time. So when I was deployed, we had an issue with some of our planes getting shot at while they were flying, and so our planes keep getting shot at. And my boss said, well, you need to figure out who's actually responsible for that. So we start digging into it, and we start looking into it, and me and the one analyst that I work with, we think this one group, we think it's ICE actually shooting at our. Well, another analyst gets up there, and they get in front of the commander, and we told this analyst, hey, we're pretty sure it's ISIS. And the analyst gets up there, and they go, no, it's Shia militia groups. They're shooting at our. And they got a map up, and they're showing it all. And I'm looking at it, and so after they get done, briefing it, the commander buys off on what they I go up to them and I ask them, I go, why'd you say it was, the Shia militia groups and not ISIS? We're all pretty certain it's ISIS. And they look at me and they say, because the map from my slide shows basically, it's called a FLOT, but it's the forward line of troops. And it shows that we're being shot at on this side controlled by Shia militia. It shows that's where we're being shot at. And rather than try to convince the commander that this forward line of troops isn't permeable, because terrorist groups don't care where the forward line of the battlefield. They'll drive through it all night. It was just easier to tell the commander that it was this group. So we're kind of sitting there and we're like, well, it's not the right answer. And they go, yeah, but you're then trying to argue with the commander and tell him that the map isn't accurate.
So that definitely sounds like a don't be that analyst.
Yeah. So we were like, all right. And then luckily we were validated and able to go back and, correct it, because about 3 or 4 days later, information would come out that, yeah, it was actually, they had all this reporting that came out. And we're like, well, sir, this hiring to this.
Now, did the strategy change drastically based on changing that intel? Like what you did next, like what your recommendation to do next, did it change drastically given that it went from one group being responsible to now thinking, no, you're telling command staff, no, it's this other group?
It did in a way, but at the same time, neither group was really trusted.
Mm-hmm.
It did, but it didn't at the time. I would say the biggest change was there were some minor changes to the route line, but overall, command staff concerned with both groups anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So it did force some minor changes to routes, but overall, the thing we still needed to fly into the airfield we were flying.
So that's a interesting situation that you got yourself in, or I guess you didn't get yourself in, that you experienced, because obviously there was many ways to handle that, and you certainly could have not waited until the briefing was over and stand up then and explain why you think it's this other group, ISIS, but you waited and really did it seems from my point of view, you went more of a diplomatic route and tried to work behind the scenes and get it resolved in a more diplomatic way.
Yeah. I mean, so at the time when all this happened, I was been on active duty about 3 years, and the analyst who actually briefed it had been in the military for about 10 when they actually gave the briefing. And so it was one of those things where they had so much experience and time that the commander knows that, and they ultimately weigh those years of experience at the same time too. So me getting up there and trying to fight that point at that time, is it worth destroying that person's credibility over, or can we find more information and go back and tell the commander later, like, actually, sir, it's this, we found more information that kind of leads to this, that the other analyst.
Yeah, let them save face a little bit. All right. So then, in terms of your military career, is there other aspects of maybe some of the accomplishments that you created or something that you're particularly proud of?
I would say obviously one of the things I'm proud of is going back to the tech school and getting to teach and train the next generation of intel officers and kind of offer them tips and tricks and advice. But I would say while I was at White, one of the big things there is it's a strategic level platform, so we do a lot of deterrence messaging with our bomber aircraft. Russia and China and all of that. Actually being able to kind of serve in that regard, you're constantly out there doing stuff like that, being involved in things that, most people don't see happen every day, but they happen today, where you're out, conducting exercises to kind of send that message along the way. So the military does a big exercise called Red Flag that takes place in Las Vegas, and getting to go out there and do that and work the Brits and the Aussies cool as well, because you get to kind of see how we integrate, our allies and all of the type of operations that they can perform and how we help each other. So that was another cool to go out and get to see how that's all done. Kind of an interesting story. So while we were out there at Red Flag, it's kind of that intel analysts need to be prepared at any kind of time to do anything. One of our pilots with their upgrade. Well, we didn't know this at the time, but if your pilot's doing this certain upgrade, the intel unit for that platform ports the pilot as lead intel organization for the whole expedition. So when we had gone out, we were just me and one other person. Normally, when you go out to support a Red Flag, you take half of your shop. You're looking at 10 people or so going going out to support the thing because you got people working day and night. Well, because we only sent the two of us out there, we didn't take supplies with us because our planning all of our missions from Whiteman. Our planes were flying from White Vegas and then go back. So we didn't have any planes out there. We didn't have any equipment for us because we were just passing information from the exercise back to White so they could actually execute the missions from Whiteman. So lo and behold, Captain walks and he goes, "Oh, by the way, you guys are the lead intel team's mission." And I look at him and I said, "Well, I don't have anything, sir. I have no maps. I have no markers, pens, anything." I said, "I have myself, a phone, and a notepad to write notes to send back to Whiteman." And so he goes, "What do you mean you guys didn't bring anything out here?" And I go, "We weren't planning on doing this. You know, all our mission planning is taking place back at Whiteman." So he goes, "Well, you guys better find something because you got about an hour before you need to do your briefing."
Oh, boy.
So we're running around this whole big building, stealing maps off the walls, looting people's markers where we could find them. And we got the briefing done, and we got it all, got everything thrown together.
Oh, man.
But at the end, we have our feedback with our mentor, and they go, "What were you guys thinking when you came out here?" And we go, "Well, we weren't thinking we'd have to do this." But it was a mess, but we did it. But it was not pretty, and then, we get done and we were turning people's markers to them, hanging the maps back up on the wall and stuff like that. So it was interesting, but it was one of those things where I was proud I was able to, get everything thrown together, even with having nothing, next to nothing to work with at the start.
Yeah. Definitely a always be prepared type of moment, so I can totally agree with that. All right, so I guess one last question before we move on to you getting into the sheriff's office is that, so did you see Top Gun Maverick?
I have not.
Oh, okay. So I was kind of curious how accurate that was, and because that whole movie is about planning a special mission and having to do a very precise degree of difficulty for the jets in order to succeed in the mission. So I was kind of curious when you watched that, what you were thinking.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet. My wife and I both wanted to see it, but we have two little boys, a 3-year-old and 1-year-old, who limit that ability to go watch movies sometimes.
Yeah, I get it.
We haven't got a chance to see it yet, but I do know there are some things, at least from like the original Top Gun, where Top Gun does do a pretty good job of depicting some of the things that happen actually in the military and and that type of stuff. So Top Gun is I haven't seen the new one, but the original one does do a decent job as well too.
All right, well, let's take a break. When we come back, I do want to talk about your transition from the military to the sheriff's office. I want to talk to you about some personal interests, and we're going to do a call-in segment, favorite first job. So if you have a favorite first job, get your call in. You're listening to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Mary Bertucelli. Would you like to solve a cold case? If your answer is yes, then enter a cold case from your agency into VICAP, the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. Thanks.
Hi, this is Jim Mallard. I'm the Crime Analysis Division Manager for the Houston Police Department. This is my public service announcement. This is a reminder from the people around you. Please don't make us listen to your half of your phone calls. If we're in a line or on a bus or in an elevator or some other captive situation we can't get out of, please be kind and hang up the damn phone.
Welcome back. Andrew, let's talk about the transition out of the military, because you mentioned in the first part of the interview that you were debating whether to sign on for more active duty time or to eventually become a civilian. So what went into that decision?
So when I originally joined the military, I planned to do 20 years, and then I met my wife, and I wasn't really sure if I wanted to do 20 years anymore as far as active. So I would say the real kind of decision point for me was after we had our first son. So we had him while I was a good fellow, and my dad was in the military, but he was never in the military during my lifetime before I was born. And so I always had a close relationship with my grandma and my grandpa and my parents, and we never really moved around a lot. And so I wanted him to have a relationship with my parents, my wife's family, and her parents and her grandma and all that type of stuff. And so I started thinking about it. I was like, well, what do I want to do here? Do I want to kind of keep going on, or do I not? And about the time, that decision had to be made, we found out my wife was pregnant with our second son, and I looked at her and I said, all right, so what do we want to do here? I said, we can get out and go, settle down and be close to family, and let the boys have a relationship with grandparents and that type of stuff, or we can continue on. But I looked at her and I said, but if we go, if we leave Goodfellow and go to one more duty station, I said, the train's on the tracks and it's not getting off the tracks, because at that point, when I would have finished that next assignment, I would have been over halfway, and at that point, it makes sense to get the retirement at 20, and we're not gonna, get off the track. So we kind of talked about it a little back and forth, and ultimately decided that, it's the time to settle down, because the other issue would have been, if I'd have gone to 20 years, my oldest would have been in high school at the time. So, there would have been a thing where we're not moving while he's in high school, so we're stuck where we're stuck. And then the youngest one, now he would have been in high school going into high school while the oldest one was in high school, so we'd have been stuck there even longer. So it was one of those things where neither my wife or I had really moved around a bunch as kids. We always we were around family and that type of stable nature, and so we decided, I think it's best for our kids to have a relationship with their grandparents, so let's leave active duty. So I decided to leave active duty, I would say, in the spring of right around the time that COVID hit.
Good timing.
Yeah, I know, right? Perfect timing. The world goes into chaos. I decided, let's give up the stable. But I still had another about year or so before I could get out from the military. So, I was sitting there and I were like, well, hopefully the world turns around a little by the time we're ready to get out. And it did in a way. So I did my transition. My wife was due in February, and my time in the military on active duty ended April of 2021. So about 2 months in between there. So she moved back actually around Christmas time to Ohio, and I was looking for a job while she was gone. And so I'm looking around, trying to find a job. Come on, something needs to pop up and go my way kind of thing. And so I want to say it was around January or so, I saw a listing for Criminal Intelligence Analyst, and I said, well, I'm an Intel Analyst. Let me apply for this, and hopefully it kind of works out. And it was with the Sheriff's Department, so I was in town because my youngest son had just born, and so I'd taken leave from the military for that time, for his birth, and then a few weeks after he was born, I did my interview with the Sheriff's Department. I wasn't really sure how I did, but I would say that, AK kind of grilled me along the way, but, I would say that was one of the advantages the military gave me. Is it's kind of a board-style interview. One of the things the military likes to do is they do what they call a murder board, which is where they put you in front of 5 people and let them berate you with questions to make sure that you know what you're talking about, and they trust you to go forward and do things. So I would say the military actually set me up kind of perfect for that type of interview that I had Sheriff's Department. It was probably about a month or so after I did the interview, they called and offered me the job, and I said, yep, I need a job, and I'll do it, kind of. So
yeah, so there wasn't much downtime there, right? So you got out in April and you started with the Sheriff's Department in April, right?
Yes. So my separation date from active duty was April 15th, and then I started on April 29th. So there was about 2 weeks kind of in between there, but that was per my request. A couple of buddies of mine who in a while we had planned a trip, so we told AK. I said, yeah, I'd like to be there, but I have a little vacation planned. So I took my little vacation and started work.
Man, good for you. It looks like you lucked out and you got a little bit of downtime. So that's worked out well for you. So back to the interview, you obviously didn't have the law enforcement analysis background, but I'm guessing that the questions that you were asked, you could easily relate and answer to based on some of the things that you did in the military.
That's correct, yeah, for sure. I know one of the questions I remember being asked, what do you think is the most important part of the whole intelligence cycle and how all that functions? And that was one of the things that, the military harps on is, how does the flow of intelligence, the intelligence cycle, and how things work. And ultimately, in my opinion, when you look at the intelligence cycle, being able to evaluate the information you have and what you need to collect further is going to be, one of those more important elements of when you look at intelligence. So I think it was one of those things where, because I had taught it, because I had learned it, and because I had done it, one of the questions that was interesting is the difference between, intelligence and evidence. And, that's something you don't have to think about in the military of, intelligence versus evidence kind of thing. But at the same time, if you get an idea what intelligence is from the military, to me, and having my mom be a law enforcement officer. I'd heard talk about those types growing up. So without necessarily having the whole ton of law enforcement experience, but, talking to people who had done law enforcement and having the intelligence experience, I think is really kind of what helped me get through the self.
So with that intelligence cycle question, is there a right or wrong answer to that? Or is that one of those interview questions where there's multiple answers and it's just how you defend your answer?
I think it's the latter, what you said there. It's more of you could probably argue that the multiple different of those steps are actually important, but it's kind of your own personal opinion. And do you have the understanding and knowledge to actually articulate why you think that step is the most important?
Yeah. Well, I certainly don't think it's the most important step, but the one that always makes me smile is collate, because I just feel that that's just one that it's probably eventually going to be hard to understand, because I knew it collate based on copying machines and how, the output of copying machines worked, and it would say, how do you want it collated? So that's it. That part I understood because of the word, but collate is such an old word, and as we get farther and farther away from paper products, I don't know if generations are going to have difficulty understanding the concept of collate.
Yeah, we talk about being paper free, and I always joke. I said the Air Force has been trying to be paper free for years now, and it's still they still print more paper than I've ever seen. So, I don't know if the sheriff's department might be able to be paper free.
Yeah. All right. So then let's talk about you starting at the sheriff's office and maybe what your expectation going in was, how it was the same as the military, maybe how it was different.
I would say expectations going in. The unit that I actually joined is a fairly new unit. I think we're really in our second year of having a team of analysts actually part of it. So kind of going in, expectations of, this is something that I can make it in a way obviously as long as leadership approves, but make it in a way that I want it to kind of be a job I kind of want to be and what to do. And I have kind of the ability to learn and develop as an analyst in a way that I kind of want, as far as what the job entails. We were, like I said, we were a new unit, new people. Obviously the big thing coming into that unit like that is you really don't know, who you're getting ready to work with and what their level of experience as far as that type of stuff goes. But that would be the biggest thing for me when I came into the unit as far as expectation was, this is really something that I can make a job I enjoy. There isn't there's obviously the legal things that take place when you do intelligence work, but as far as the job itself, as long as my boss is okay with me going this route and learning how to do this, focusing on this, it's kind of up to me. It was kind of how I felt coming into the job. I would say the biggest difference, and it's still something that I find interesting today, coming from military intelligence, civilian intelligence. In military intelligence, you're not allowed to look at U.S. persons. You're not allowed to look at anything that is a U.S. entity, whether it be a business or whatever, unless your unit has a special mission to do it, which I know never was a part of it. You did. And so I remember when I was at Whiteman, we had a pilot, and he was trying to be like, hey, can you, figure out what frequency this radar is emitting on, that's air traffic control radar, and then can you figure out what kind of adversary radar emits in a similar frequency so we can, pretend that said radar is adversary radar when we do our training. And at first I was like, sure, and then I started talking to one of the guys I worked with, and he goes, we can't do that. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, U.S.-owned radar. And I go, you're right. So I went back to the pilot, and I said, yeah, man, I can't do that because, it's a U.S. entity, and I'm not allowed to do that. Versus, as what I do now, where I'm always looking at U.S. people and, obviously within the legal ramifications of who I'm allowed to look at, but, I'm not allowed to, going from not being able to look at anything related to a U.S. person to now all I look at is U.S. person. A very kind of interesting difference between the two of them.
Yeah, and it seems like you have a pretty wide variety of analysis that you're looking at your resume here. And it deals with statistical reports, it deals with repeat offenders, repeat victims, repeat locations, and then it also gets into specific criminal activity and tactical intelligence. So it is pretty wide range of activities that you're being asked to do.
That is for sure. Yeah, a lot of different people, different places. I mean, you see the same people all the time. People who've done this a long time know that you bump into the same names, faces every so often. But I will say one of the cool things that I enjoy is, no day is the same.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're looking at the same individual, they're not necessarily doing the exact over and over.
Yeah. So in terms of taking your military background and applying it to your current job, stuff like speaking in front of others is usually a common skill set that I hear folks talk about, and writing, reapplying that to their current duties. Is there something that the military taught you that maybe you were surprised that it carried over, or that when you tell people that maybe they're think like, oh, I wouldn't think that would carry over from the military over into law enforcement?
I mean, you hit the big kind of normal ones that people talk about from the military, but I would say one of the things the military teaches, and it's one of those things that even I as an officer obviously had more specific training to it, but even the lowest level individual in the military, lowest ranking military member, gets taught leadership and followership, and that's obviously one of those skills that kind of transfers over, I guess, regardless. But I would say it was one of those things that, especially in a new unit, was useful because I could sit down with my boss. We could have a conversation, and she'd ask, well, you've been in a military unit, and they did this. We're thinking about doing this part of our unit. Have you had any experience with that from a military type thing? So I would say that was one of the big things. Is I'd sat in those kind of meetings based on where my rank, so it was interesting to kind of be able to use that. That was one of those skills where, leadership and followership, I kind of expected to kind of come with me, but I never really expected to be asked this kind of question. Based on your experiences, having done this kind of thing before, what do you think of it? So that would be one kind of thing I took from the military that, is more than just your writing and briefing.
Yeah.
I would say the other kind of big thing in military, not like law enforcement, where law enforcement has its crime analysis, intelligence analysis, the military, kind of your intelligence analysts, they do some of the statistical analysis, the stuff that we would view more as crime analysis in this career field. They do a lot of that kind of stuff as part of their job in the military, and I would say that was one of the things that when I kind of started this job and we would work on a few crime stat products, that it kind of was like, oh, well, this is kind of normal analysis that I would do in the military, where, I'm looking at numbers and what's going on over here, and then kind of applying it and doing it all together. So that would be another kind of big.
Yeah, and I definitely do want to get into that conversation, crime analysis versus intelligence analysts. But you had mentioned that you have enough flexibility to make this position what you want, and I realize that you've only been into the positions for 16 months, but in that 16 months, really, what have you been able to accomplish in establishing the position?
So I would say the first biggest thing, with poor grammar, but I would say the first big thing that really we started working on was we had a rash of cars. And so, we were looking for trends in regard to communities where they're happening, kind of cars are stolen, what's the MO that the offenders are using. And ultimately, we determined that here's all these different locations that are hitting. They're hitting when they're hitting them, days of the week. And so that was kind of the first big thing that we really worked on as a team. And ultimately kind of using the sheriff herself to kind of push the message out of, hey, people. Ultimately, what we discovered is the biggest indicator of whether or not these people were going to get their cars stolen was the fact that people left their cars unlocked.
Yeah. Sometimes they leave it running, which makes it nice.
Yeah, no. Luckily, we didn't have any of those, and then sit there and kind of wonder, like, sometimes the same person to get hit twice, and you're like, why you didn't learn the first time?
Now it just sounds like a scam.
Not to leave your not to leave your keys in the car, kind of thing. But we ultimately got to present some of that. One of the prosecuting officers in the surrounding county was kind of cool in that regard. And since then, I'd say one of the other big things that I've worked on is a rash, basically individuals getting into the the blue mailboxes that are outside most post offices and stealing checks from them. And that's kind of been the big thing I've been working on now is stolen checks that are being cash mailed out to individuals all throughout the country. So we had checks stolen from Cincinnati end up in New York State or New Jersey, and it's somebody writing a check for $100, pay their electric bill, and it's getting cash New York for $20,000.
Oh, so not only are they stealing the check, they're doing some counterfeiting as well, and that they're changing the amount on the check.
Correct, yeah. So, I mean, that's been a very interesting and, it's a type of crime that, if you'd asked me last year when I started, do you want to work on a money fraud case with people stealing, an old person's check and then they're mailing it out and somebody's cashing it for $20,000, probably would have told you that doesn't sound very interesting at all. But once you actually start to dig into it, the whole process of that has been very interesting. I've reached out and called a professor. That's what they study is, type of crime where people are fraudulently stealing, they're stealing checks from blue mailboxes, selling them online, anonymous apps like, WhatsApp or Telegram, and, to buyers who are buying these checks, and they're paying them for the check, and then they're going to check X dollar amount that they pay the buyer, they pay the seller. It's a very kind of interesting thing, and one of the, like I said, where I get to kind of make the job what I want it to be. Like I said, you asked me last year, I would have said, no, it really doesn't sound that interesting, but actually getting to kind of, a unit that's defining itself on what its capabilities are, and very, very cool to kind of learn. I may have told you wouldn't interest me or now interested.
Yeah. Now, in terms of targeting the blue mailbox, is that something that you found is just in Cincinnati, or is this something that folks are seeing across the United States?
It's actually something that's pretty much across the United States. When I was kind of doing my research of trying to figure out how it was all functioning, article I found that actually started me down the path of looking at some of these different things was actually out of D.C. It was a Washington Post article, and they were talking about kind of a similar instances going on. But it was very interesting. And then as I kind of worked more and worked with our detectives, and we kind of started to put pieces together, and they started working with the postal inspector. The postal inspector was basically telling them it's kind of a thing going on nationwide. People get a hold of the keys to get into the blue mailboxes, and then they basically steal checks.
Wow. All right. And just, have you been able to take any law enforcement analysis training?
Yeah, so when we first started, one of the things that our unit pushed through was for all of the analysts to take the ILEA course, introductory level course. So I took that class.
I think it's Fiat. Is that Fiat?
Fiat, yeah. I took that class and then hit my 1 year as far as after completing that, I think July. So that was one of the first courses they had us take as far as that, because like I said, we were a new unit, so we had a guy who Army intel but didn't have any law enforcement experience, and then we had a individual who she had her PhD in criminology, so didn't have a ton of analytical experience, but had more of the knowledge base as far as how law enforcement functions.
Okay. I'm curious to know, and we can stick with the project you're working on with the blue mailboxes. Do you feel that the military handles issues like that differently from what you've experienced there with the sheriff's office? So you certainly have gone through some training now, and so is the way you got trained with law enforcement analysis going to tackle that problem differently from maybe how the military would handle it if they had a similar situation?
From an intelligence perspective, I would say it wouldn't necessarily be different. I would say probably the methods they would use would be a little bit different. I think one of the big problems that law enforcement and the military face when it comes to dealing with problems, you have a ton of problem sets to deal with, and you have a very limited, finite number of resources to elect or act upon whatever you're trying to. So one of the things they would always tell us in the military is, you may have a problem set, but there's, always a bigger fish who's going to absorb those resources at that time that you need to actually collect. And it's the same thing kind of here in law enforcement where, I've been focused on this problem set, but there's also 10 other problem sets that kind of pop up, to detract my time, other people's time, detract the detective's time to actually kind of focus on these cases. So I would say the approach is going to be similar. One of the big differences is the military has a ton of money at the same time. They can buy some of the better systems, better capabilities to collect, but in the end, both the military and law enforcement run into the same issue of you have infinite problems with limited resources to actually deal with those infinite problems.
All right, and then we can use that same example with the blue mailboxes, because to segue into this idea of crime analysis and intelligence analysts in law enforcement, because I think there's obviously various avenues for law enforcement agencies to tackle that problem similar to the blue mailbox. In that, obviously, there's the investigative side where you're trying to identify and arrest whoever is responsible for stealing those checks. And then there's another angle that you could take, which you get into prevention, where you start to educate the public or start doing some target hardening to where you make that blue mailbox more difficult to get items out of. And that's just two avenues that you could take, but it does get into this idea of historically you may have intel analysts looking at the people trying to identify who's responsible. And the crime analyst may be going down the path of, problem-oriented policing, where they are looking at problem areas, problem targets, what have you. In this case, it's a blue mailbox, and trying to work more at the prevention avenue. But I think from you, as you mentioned in the military side, that would all be done as part of the same project. But in law enforcement analysis, it's really, those are two separate functions.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things as far as, I think as far as how that all goes, you really hit the nail on the head as far as you have multiple kind of ways to deal with how a crime is stopped and how to discourage individuals from either going to this location and continuing to commit a crime. Like, what about X location makes it inviting to in case you talk about law enforcement, the criminal? Is it poorly lit? But at the same time, looking at the individual themselves and trying to determine, maybe this location's poorly lit, but maybe this location's important to them as well, and kind of draws them here for other reasons. Do they live in the area? Is it convenient for them? All those types of factors really play a role, as well as intel perspective, trying to assess when the individuals act again, determine all that way the investigator can be in the right place at the right time to stop crime from happening from the law enforcement angle.
Yeah, I obviously, and we talked on this show a couple times about it. I think where the analyst is stationed dictates how the tasks that they're assigned and what type of analysis that they're going to be doing. I've been assigned to the homicide unit, for instance, and obviously in that scenario, I was supporting homicide investigations, and that was my main duty. And then I've been assigned to be an analyst, and I was stationed closer to the IT staff. And in that regard, it seemed like I was more into data management and just special projects that came up either as investigations or strategic analysis came into play. So in the same regards, coming back to this blue mailbox deal, if I am normally supporting investigations, and that's my main goal as an analyst, to support investigations, tactical analysis, if you will. It does seem kind of odd then that I would say, oh, you know what, we do want to investigate these sets of crimes, but also we want to go into more of the target hardening, solving the problem. That does seem a little bit odd to me, that somebody that was supporting analysis would jump over to that. That does seem like two separate roles to me. And mainly it's because they're probably, if they're there to support investigations, that once this investigation's done, they would just jump to the next investigation to support that instead of sticking with this particular scenario of trying to solve and prevent theft in blue mailboxes.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that from that perspective for sure. I think one of the reasons the military does kind of that as it is it's always trying to evaluate, because in the military, at least from my experience, you're trying to come up with a counter and your adversary is trying to come up with a counter to that counter along those lines. And so your analysts are constantly thinking about, okay, well, I've done this to kind of alter what I'm doing, altered my behavior to do this, and now the adversary is now doing something different. And maybe that counters what I had done previously. I remember I heard a story from someone while I was an analyst that there were certain individuals thought that somehow the military was putting trackers in Lipton tea, and the adversary stopped drinking Lipton tea because they thought that somehow we were tracking them through trackers that had been placed.
Wow.
And it was just one of those things where they took an approach to, I guess, kind of how you mentioned hardening the mailboxes, how they approach to harden themselves. I mean, granted, it was the wrong approach, but I think that's one of the ways where analysis kind of plays in as well. As you might take an avenue to approach on how to harden a target, but maybe we were wrong on how we chose to actually kind of approach that target. So yeah, I might have moved on to a different topic, immediately after we come up with a solution. But I feel like I should always come back to that, that previous problem set every so often and reevaluate. Did the action I took actually have an effect, or did we harden incorrectly? Did the action we take result in what we wanted it to do? And if it is, has the criminal found a way around the act took to try to make that target more difficult for them to approach?
Yeah. What can happen too in police departments, when you're just talking about tactical analysis, when you're talking about just working the crime series, most likely you are staying in the realm of the police department. I mean, obviously you're going to be interviewing witnesses and maybe talking to subject matter experts that are outside of the police department. But for the most part, you are staying in the lane of law enforcement. When you go into more trying to solve the problem or trying to target harden or more prevention, then most likely you are getting outside of the police department because you're working with other departments and maybe educating the public and identifying different ways that are usually beyond law enforcement that can help prevent that particular crime. And some people aren't necessarily comfortable with that, right? It's like, oh, I'd rather just stay in police department. I'd just rather stay here, deal with the people that I know, than reach across the aisle and deal with other departments of the city or other departments, non-law enforcement entities.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that I find most, because it was a challenge even in the military. You think about the military, there are 4 branches well, 5 now with the Space Force, but you have 5 branches of the military plus the Coast Guard, and communication across those different nodes is difficult. And then you end up with in the law enforcement realm where a county might have 50 different police departments, depending on the size of the county, the number of municipalities in the county. You're trying to deal with problems that they spread across the whole county, but you're looking for that one entity and that one agency that maybe is also experiencing that difficulties that you're experiencing. And so I think that's one of the, I would say, more difficult thing in regards to policing, because everybody has their own problems they deal with. They have their own issues, and now somebody's calling you from a different department and they're dealing with a problem, and you have 10 other problems on your plate that you're trying to deal with. I think that's one of the biggest kind of challenges I've spent. Everybody's busy with their own kind of problems. I think everybody in law enforcement knows that there's manpower issues all throughout different departments. You have fewer officers and fewer employees trying to do the same amount of work. When being in the military, I remember the do more with less kind of saying. I mean, in the military, they struggled. That wasn't really practical. It was just kind of I'm trying to do everything I can, fewer people to do it, and it creates hiccups and challenges. Law enforcement seeing the exact same thing. Everybody's trying to help everybody. You're trying to help everybody out, but at the same time, there's a bunch of agencies that are all dealing with the problem.
Yeah. All right, before we move on to the favorite first jobs call-in segment, just wanted to ask about your top secret clearance. And is that something that you still have, or is that something that you no longer have now that you're outside of the military?
So it's something I still have. I have it, but I'm not indoctrinated into it, if that makes sense. So basically, there's a briefing that you get when you do your background check, you get your clearance, and you have all that. But once you're not at a job that requires it, you become unindoctrinated into the clearance. And so I have it. I just can't view any information without being indoctrinated.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating when I look back, because I eventually got the top secret SCI clearance as you did, and in my head that was going to open up so many opportunities for me. Like, once I got that clearance, I thought the world was going to be my oyster, type of things, in all seriousness. And it certainly took a while to get through, and so you're just anticipating that day of getting cleared, and it was so disappointing, to be honest with you. I don't know necessarily how it really impacted me. I did use in the job that I was getting it for, but it really didn't open up any doors, as far as I know, in terms of my career opportunities. So I always felt that it was really disappointing. I don't know if you feel the same way, or you would. I mean, certainly you probably encourage analysts, if they get the opportunity to get any type of clearance, you get it, but the expectations need to be managed.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, I enjoy. It obviously gives you access to things that you otherwise wouldn't read. But we would always joke that, the way the media is now and how social media is now, that a lot of the stuff that you can read on TS is somewhere out there on Google. If you Google it the right somewhere out. Somebody's already posted about that information on Twitter or something.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff you can just get if you know where to look. But I do agree, it's awesome to get, and I do think it does open some doorways for you. But at the same time, yeah, there's a lot of stuff on there that you're like, man, this is really boring. There's nothing about JFK or aliens on here.
Exactly. All right, so we're going to play your favorite first jobs. We have 6 callers on the line, and so first on the line is Jim. Jim, what is your favorite first job?
Well, not really a job. It was more like a gig. The first couple of years that I was a crime analyst, I played in a local college rock band. I've been a drummer all of my life. I started out college as a music major and marched in college band, played in drum and bugle corps. So I continued that. When I started a crime analyst, I played in a local college band for about 2 years. I had to give it up eventually. The other guys in the band, they had dreams of making it big, and we started doing shows more and more nights of the week. And it was hard to have a full-time job as a crime analyst and then, be up all night till 3 or 4 in the morning playing. So it got to be a little bit too much, but it was a great experience, and I had tons of fun playing in a band in a college town.
So that's interesting. That makes me think of the Bryan Adams song "Summer of '69," right, where the band breaks up. And I don't know about you, but I don't necessarily have a musical bone, so I am certainly impressed of someone that has analytical skills and musical talent.
I can't play any musical instruments either, so I have no musical bones either.
Yeah, but that's definitely an interesting first job. All right, next on the line is Chris. Chris, what's one of your favorite first job?
My favorite first job was selling fireworks in the parking lot of a Walmart. People would walk up, look under the tables, and then say, "Where are all the illegal fireworks?"
I mean, I remember growing up with, fireworks, and they were, I would say, probably my favorite experience, and kind of the craziest event with fireworks that, I ever experienced was we bought some fireworks to celebrate the 4th of July, and we're out in the field shooting them off. My dad, I, and Mr. And the fireworks fell over, and I remember we all dove and hit the deck, and I remember my dad, he's laying on top of my sister, probably about 10 at the time, as the fireworks are whistling over our heads. So I don't know if that counts, as far as, your interesting fireworks experience, but they definitely weren't illegal. So they were definitely illegally purchased fireworks. But yeah, I don't really even know. I've never seen anybody sell fireworks in a parking lot before.
Yeah, well, they do here in Florida, but they're pretty specific here in Florida. And it's so funny how the different states and different rules. In Florida, you can only fire off fireworks twice a year, 4th of July and New Year's. Other than that, you can't do it legally. And so, but they'll have them in the Walmart parking lots, the tents selling fireworks. Actually, I just talked to a buddy who lives in Illinois, and apparently in Illinois, as you're traveling the highways to, I think it's Wisconsin, he said, that there's a sign on the Illinois side that says last chance to buy marijuana before you get to Wisconsin. And on the Wisconsin side, it says on the same highway, last chance to buy fireworks. So apparently you can buy weed in Illinois, but not fireworks. And in Wisconsin, you can buy fireworks, but not weed. Strange place we live in. So, all right. Next on the line is Danielle. Danielle, what's one of your favorite first jobs?
I would have to say being an archaeologist. That was an awesome experience. I worked in Southern California in Newport Beach, and some of the stuff we found had never been seen before of Native Americans. And so I really miss being out in the field and doing that kind of stuff, but it was a great experience. It actually taught me databases and ArcGIS mapping, crazy enough. But so, yeah, I owe that job to helping me become a crime analyst.
On the show, often I am fascinated what people did before they were analysts. And to me, when she first said that about being an archaeologist, I was like, oh, that doesn't sound very relatable. But then at the end, she had a nice hook into how it helped her learn ArcGIS and some of the other programming. So that's something that I would not have anticipated a nice clean path from archaeology to law enforcement analysis.
Yeah, yeah. I just think when I think archaeology, I think, Indiana Jones is kind of the standard what pops into my brain. So I don't think of Indiana Jones hopping on a computer and using ArcGIS to map, his next treasure hunt or, archaeological dig he's going on. So
yeah, well,
there's interesting kind of first job.
Well, there is a new movie coming out with Indiana Jones, so Esri, get on that. You can get to have some marketing opportunities. All right, our next caller is Joan. Joan, what's one of your favorite first jobs?
Well, believe it or not, Jason, I used to be the little old lady that made the biscuits for Hardee's. When I was in college, I was working 2 jobs, and they threw me in there in the morning to make biscuits. And I'm not a big cook myself, but I'd go in 3 o'clock in the morning, get up and make the biscuits from scratch at Hardee's every Saturday and Sunday for a long time.
Excellent. And what do they do with the ones that they don't sell? Do they just throw them out?
They do, or let you take them home.
Oh, okay.
But they were pretty good about, we're down to so many, and you'd make another batch. You tried to keep them fresh, and same thing with hamburgers. You can only keep it for so long, and they called it getting burned on the grill.
Yeah.
Like burgers too at Hardee's and Wendy's, but yeah, you don't ever want to get burned on the grill.
No, that's interesting. See, I would have never known about that.
Now, I'll tell you a funny story, Jason. When I worked at Hardee's in the mornings, then I'd go to Wendy's in the afternoon on weekends. So I'd make the biscuits, then I'd work the drive-through in the morning at Hardee's. My shift would end at 2, then I'd go to Wendy's in the evening. And so working the windows at Hardee's that morning, and then I'm at Wendy's, and this guy comes through the drive-through, and he looks at me, and he's like, "Do you have a twin sister?" I was like, "What? No. Why?" He goes, "I could have sworn you sold me biscuits this morning at Hardee's." That's the same guy. I said, "Well, you're at the right restaurant. This is the one I'm working at today."
That is funny.
First job was in fast food.
Yeah, well, I think in particular, Hardee's, their claim to fame is their fresh biscuits. And so it's definitely something that's made from scratch. When I think of fast food, I think of just everything's in the freezer and you either throw it in the fryer or throw it on the grill. And that's essentially what you're doing. But with the process of making the biscuits, there's actually a process of rolling the dough and cutting them out and actually what seems like actual baking. Yeah. All right. Next on the line is Krista. Krista, what's one of your favorite first jobs?
When I was 16 years old, my first job was working at Tom McCann Shoes. It was 1984, and the minimum wage was $3.35 an hour. But I worked on commission. So if I sold you a matching purse or socks, I would earn some commission. And so I actually am proud to say that I averaged about $5 an hour during those times.
Yeah, and $5 back in 1984 an hour. That was actually a pretty good wage for a teenager.
Yeah, I mean, well before I was born, so I can't really speak too much to that.
No, because I was thinking too. I think in '89, I think I was only making $3 an hour at an amusement park. So she was doing better than me 5 years earlier. So,
Yeah,
all right.
that's not bad at all.
Yeah. So, all right. And our final caller is Eric. Eric, what's one of your favorite first jobs?
Party furniture delivery man. My parents actually owned a small party store. We would deliver tables, chairs, and put up tents, right? So it was nice to be outside most of the day.
That's an interesting thing. And we did so much moving when we were kids. It makes me think that, yeah, I probably could easily have been a mover and help move furniture and whatnot, because we had to always move furniture into various angles upstairs and narrow hallways and whatnot. So I probably could have done that job. So, but that's also, you're dealing with people when they're the most stressed, right? Moving is very stressful. So you're dealing with that anxiety.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a mover half the time when I go home from work, because my wife's got some kind of idea on how she wants to rearrange, this room or that room. And so I feel like I spend half the time when I get home rearranging the rooms in the house to move stuff from here to there or wherever she wants it there.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's favorite first jobs. If you have a favorite first job you want to share with us, contact us at leapodcasts@gmail.com. All right, Andrew, let's finish up with words to the world. This is where I give the guest the last word. You can promote any idea that you wish. What are your words to the world?
I would say it's kind of what I told my students when I was at tech school is really never stop learning. Always find something interesting or new to learn, because you just never know when that's going to be valid for whatever you're working on. You'd be surprised at the times that you're working on something and the answer that you find is something that you read 4 or 5 years ago. But yeah, my biggest thing, and I always told it to my students when I was teaching, was never stop learning and always trying to make yourself better.
Very good. Well, I leave every guest with, you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later. But I do appreciate you being on the show, Andrew. Thank you so much, and you be safe.
Thank you for having me. Be safe as well.